So that was really awesome, wasn't it? I really thought that really showed off this amplifier's qualities, and hopefully everybody out there could really pick up on that. So before we talk about the amp, let's talk a little bit more about what I'm using in the system today. It's very similar to what we did for the Magico review. So today we've got the Magico S5s again in the system. We're using the CJ GAT preamp. We're using the Doshi Audio phono section with the Telefunken ECC 801S tubes and EAT 803S tubes. We're using the VPI Classic Direct with the 3D arm. Rather than today throwing a big expensive cartridge like the Atlas or the Transfig like we used the last time, I've been reviewing this $1,400 Charisma MC2 cartridge that I got in from Canada that I'm doing for positive feedback. And it's a really great sounding cartridge, and it does more than any $1,400 cartridge has any right to do. So I thought today we'd kind of, instead of being in the stratosphere, we'll use that cartridge for the review. So on the tape side today, we're using my Modified Techniques reel-to-reel that has the Pro Nortronics heads in it, and the electronics that are used with it are the King Cello, and the King Cello is basically a derivative of the old Cello 603 module with a few updates. So it's really a great sounding front end for the tape deck. The cables, as before, the interconnects are the transparent MM2 series. And the big difference today is we've got the Viero cables in from Italy that I just recently reviewed for positive feedback that I thought were pretty exemplary cables. They run for the 6-foot length about $8,000, and they just really complement every amp that I've had in here, especially when it comes to just the low-level musical shadings, and everything that it does just makes everything just that couple percentage sounding more real. So again, that's just a little bit of the overall system, and we've got the table sitting on the silent running Audio Ohio Class XL2 rack, and again we described the amp sitting on the hi-fi racks, Kraz rack that everything else is sitting in, so that kind of provides the isolation for all the components. And finally, the front end is hooked into the Silver Circle power line conditioner, the Chike 6, and again, so everything, all the power that goes to it is filtered there. And finally, you'll see one of the Still Points aperture panels for treating the room acoustics. They kind of do everything in one. They're absorbers, diffusers, reflectors, and they kind of do a nice job, I think, here. Especially what the biggest thing that I hear that they do right now, and I haven't finalized everything, there's a couple different configurations that I have still to go, but the biggest thing is it kind of just quiets everything down in the room. It just seems to, everything in the background just seems much quieter. So again, I'm still playing with them. They're not positioned perfectly yet. They're not hung. I'm kind of have them loose, so I'm just kind of moving them back and forth to find the right place before they're kind of fastened in place permanently. And that rounds out the list of equipment for today's review. So let's talk a little about the sound of this monster amp. You know, we're talking 400 watts into the Magicos, and we know the Magicos definitely drop down below 4 ohms, so it's putting out even more than that 400 watts per channel into that speaker. So I thought the one thing we kind of do is would digress first, because, you know, a lot of times I read these reviews of solid state amps, and I don't know, I just always read say, oh, this amp sounds like a triode amp, or this sounds like a tube amp, and I go and hear it, and I don't know, I never kind of get that feeling. And you know, I really don't care what the amp sounds like. Does it sound like music? Is probably the more important point. But the one thing that I really did like about this amp is it really was the least electronic sounding solid state amp I've had in here. It doesn't have any of that coldness that you would come to associate with most solid state amps. And, you know, it just lacks that. It just kind of breathes. It's just the ultimate in smoothness, but it's not so smooth that you kind of feel like, for example, years ago when I reviewed the old Levinson 332 amplifier, that kind of built in this darkness into the amp that really kind of, wow, we were trying to color it a little bit and make it sound a little less electronic. I feel like here it's sounding less electronic, and it's just the way it sounds. It's not having to be forced into the design of the amplifier. So that being said, I really feel that when you listen to this amplifier, I mean, the first thing that really just strikes me is its effortlessness. You know, it has that power, and one of the things, you know, all things being equal, is that power brings you, is that feeling of just ease. No matter what the music, it's not like it's going to be, it's not going to sound bigger, but it's just that sense of ease to the music that it brings. And this amp, no matter what you put on, we'll put on one dynamic album with lots of drums on it. You're just going to hear it just never feels compressed. It just breathes naturally. And the same thing, whether it's micro or macro dynamics on this amp, it's able to resolve both really, really well. So the little tinkly things that you want to hear, the little bells, the castanets, the cymbals, all those little things that you hear, they really are well defined on this amplifier, and they just ring and they resonate and they decay, and you just hear all the littlest nuances no matter what the level that you're really listening to, which is really nice, because a lot of times with amplifiers, they just kind of, when you get to like a certain level, you just don't hear things anymore. So again, the low end on this is really what you're going to hear is extraordinarily good compared to, for example, my other reference, say the CJ Art, which sounds really good. The lowest octave, which is not bad, but again, it's not any surprise that the solid state amp really does outperform it in the lowest octave. And again, with drums, there's just a explosiveness. You put the tape on again, where you really have that unfettered sense of dynamics. And again, you just don't hear any compression in the low end. Things just get loud all of a sudden. Especially if it's not compressed, and we're not usually listening to digital, so we know that most of this stuff is not going to be that horribly compressed. When it comes to other areas of reproduction, it doesn't give up anything to any tube amp that I've heard when it comes to sound staging. It's wonderfully transparent. Everything in the back of the stage just really pops out at you. You don't feel like there's any sort of gauze over it. It separates things, and it's just wide, deep, and you got this great element of height to this amplifier. So when you put on like a choral piece, you could just hear that church breathe again. It's just like everything just comes to life. And that's the thing. I could sit here with a lot of the solid state amps in the past, and you could listen to it for a while, and after you get past a certain point, you want to turn it off. And here, you just don't feel like there's any fatigue. Like a really good tube amp, you could sit and just listen to it forever. And I don't care what you're playing, whether it's jazz, rock, classical, they all really fit real well into this amp's capability. So, I mean, that's really the most amazing part of what I hear on this amplifier. If I would identify maybe one area where it feels slightly or falls slightly short of ultimate, it might be it just has this very light touch of darkness to it. Maybe with a little different cable you could get around that. I think the other area, when I listen to it, say compared to the CJ, it just kind of lacks just a little bit of the last vestiges of low-level information, that little inner details of instruments when, especially if you're playing something that's just acoustic, there's that little bit that you don't hear, like you put on like this reference Kodo record where you listen to it and it just doesn't quite have that little last vestige of the resonance of the instrument. But I mean, that's a really minor nitpicking point when we're talking about this amp, because it does everything else so wonderfully well that you could really just listen through it, because again, it just does nothing to annoy you, and you just listen to it, and every instrument is just really there in front of you. When you get some of the tapes on that are kind of close mic'd, some of the jazz recordings, for example, and you could just feel like on the Blue Notes, a couple of Blue Notes, for example, that the tape project put out, like Lee Morgan Sidewinder, Rudy really captured the ability to put those musicians right in the room, and that's exactly what you feel with this amp. But again, that's with that recording, and you put a different recording on, you're going to get a very different perspective on the musicians, as it should be. It shouldn't be like one size fits all, but you're not going to listen to a chamber trio, in the row Z. You're going to sit close up. Whereas an orchestra, you're going to have the opposite effect. You're going to sit slightly back from it, unless you happen to be a Mercury recording where it's going to be very close up, but most of them will be a little more natural sounding. So again, it really kind of brings out the best in all types of recordings. So it doesn't have that, overwhelming coloration that some things may do that makes everything sound pretty, and that's not what I go for. I mean, I really want a product, to me, that if it's a bad sounding recording, it's bad sounding. And that's the way it is, like it or lump it. But, on the best recordings out there, and there's certainly a slew of those, as we all know, that you're just going to really hear it, everything in its beauty, and you really can feel what the producer and the recording engineer really was trying to capture. And, even to the point where you could sit there and say, well, this person's using this particular recording technique in terms of the microphone placement. And you could really hear all the different microphone placements and really understand, the pluses and minuses of each one, whether it's like a Decca Tree or it's an RCA, or you even go to a Harmonia Mundi with Pontefract where it's more of a multi-mic'd. And again, yeah, you can hear the multi-micing, but you still can understand what he's trying to do in capturing the music. So in conclusion, what it really seems to me is that if you've got any type of speaker out there, that this is one of these amps that's really going to be able to drive that speaker. And that's too many amps out there sound good on one speaker and they can't drive in others. This one, if you've got a difficult load, if you've got an easy load, this amp's going to really be able to do its best on either speaker, and it's really going to be able to bring out the best because it really, it's fast, it's very, very clean, it's extremely musical. And again, without being like the old typical solid state sound where you just feel everything's kind of over detailed. It's like everything, all the music's in its right place, in its right speed. And, even as like Dan D'Agostino used to say years ago, yeah, he could design faster circuits, but they don't sound right. And again, that's kind of what this amp does. It's fast, but it's not overly fast in that it just sounds like etched. And, that's why I think, a lot of this amps out there that I hear, they're detail galore, but it's like detail I don't necessarily hear. And this amp really just puts all the detail in its right place. And again, if you like low end, you like listening to music with drums and percussion, this is also going to just really bring out the best of those types of recordings. So whatever the recording, it's going to sound great. But if you really like drums and you'll hear one drum record, you're going to really kind of be blown away by it. Okay, Myles Astor reporting for AVShowrooms on the Audia Flight Strumento No. 4 amplifier. Thanks, and see you soon.